Good afternoon, Maine. Welcome to the Muddy Waters podcast. I am your host, Chuck Ellis. And today we are fortunate to have with us the president of, we were just talking about how fun the new way that it's labeled is, but Turning Point essentially in York County, but it's Club America, York County, also known as the high school version of Turning Point. So thanks for joining us, Colby.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, happy to do so. Obviously, as most people, I think, are probably aware at this point, because I think it's like a national day of remembrance of Charlie Kirk. Today would have been Charlie Kirk's 32nd birthday, and so we didn't plan to have you on in remembrance of Charlie, although given the fact that you are the president of a Turning Point chapter, and a number of other things, like obviously that it's not I wouldn't say ironic. There are a lot of things since the assassination of Charlie Kirk that I just think are like interesting how things lined up, especially like the guests that I've had on the podcast and the order in which they've been on. I think it's been really, really interesting. You might actually believe that there's divine inspiration in the world or something along those lines if you're not too careful. But yeah, so thanks so much for joining us either way. Let's have some fun. So I think to kind of get kicked off, I guess before that, I'm going to do some, like, we'll call it housekeeping. If you guys are watching this for the first time and you haven't liked, shared, and subscribed to the podcast, one of the best ways that we can reach, especially younger people, but people in general, with the message of conservatism, which is what we need to sell in order to win here in the state of Maine, in order to advance a conservative agenda, we need people to get involved, both physically, but also through social media. Some of the ways that you can do that and some of the ways that you can help is commenting on episodes or the shorts that we create. Liking and sharing the podcast, sharing different episodes or shorts. Those things really help with the algorithm to help us grow the number of people who are watching, not so that Chuck Ellis can become a known person, but so that the message of conservatism can be spread and we can convince more people to see the light and see the truth that the liberal agenda is an anti-human agenda. So if you could like, share, subscribe. Also, feel free to check out my podcast. This is my own shameless plug. Check out the website muddywaters.us. We have a shop. You can buy coffee as well as a number of other fun accessories and support the podcast if that's something you're interested in. All right, so get that out of the way. So what I'd like to start with, Colby, like we have barely met, but I know that you've done some fun stuff to kind of take charge there. So, but I kind of want to start with like, who are you? Where do you come from? And then, like what possessed you as a young Gen Z, right? Gen Z?
Yep.
To get involved in politics, especially in Southern Maine, especially on the conservative side. Ooh.
Yeah. So, I've grown up in Maine my whole life, and I've been blessed to be in a Christian family with conservative values, and I think that's a major portion of what's going wrong in a lot of states, especially in Maine. A lot of parents aren't Christian, so I'm blessed to have that background. I go to a Christian school as well, and I think when I first started really getting, thinking about politics, it was probably 4 or 5 years ago, maybe a bit less, maybe 4 years ago. And we had like this project at school where we could pick like any topic. And I think my mom just mentioned like, hey, you should like do politics, maybe as a joke or something. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I did. And then I kind of just got hooked. And then our school, we had Representative Nate Wadsworth and Heidi Sampson. They came and taught a class about politics, and that really helped me get involved. And then I helped on Nate Wadsworth's campaign this last campaign season. And so I've been, kind of obsessed in a way with politics in the last few years. And then so Heidi Sampson continued to teach us the class last year, and she knew that she sorry about the cough. She knew she probably wouldn't be able to this year because of all that's going on with her education stuff. And I saw that she was on your show actually a few weeks ago, wasn't she?
Yep,
Um,
yep.
and so yeah, she's like, you guys should start a Turning Point chapter. I'm like, oh, okay. So we started a Turning Point chapter, me and two of my other classmates. Yeah, and so at first we didn't really get like much notice for it really, and then after what happened, when Charlie Kirk was assassinated, that's when it really blew up. Because at first two events we had maybe 10 or 20 people, and then we hosted an event to honor Charlie Kirk, and that's the one that I sent you the thing for, and we had like 300 people there. So yeah, it's sad
Yeah.
that it took that to grow it, but God can use things like the death of someone to further His glory.
Well, let's see if I can remember the phrase. The seeds of the church are the blood of the martyrs. Is the
Yeah,
blood of the martyrs? Yeah. So so it's sad, obviously. We would prefer, for the record, anybody who's wondering. I mean, I don't think anybody is wondering, but we prefer to have Charlie Kirk here. I mean, he was an
yeah,
incredible, irreplaceable individual. However, like, there is a reality that what happened to him, I think, woke a lot of people up to a degree that
yeah,
some people were starting to awaken. Some people, like, were vaguely aware of the need to awaken, we'll say. So a lot of people have recognized that, like, okay, this stuff that the conservatives have been saying about the risks associated with some of the stuff that's going on in our culture, it's real. When you've got like one of the best human beings, again, I don't deify people, right? Charlie Kirk is a human. He is not Jesus. He is not the second coming of Jesus. He was a human being. He was flawed, and I'm not going to cite them for you, but he had some failures that stuff that he said publicly, in particular, in certain cases, that, he shouldn't have said. Like any human being, the guy was videoed more than probably most human beings, in history.
yeah,
And so you're bound to find some situations where he said some things that he shouldn't have said. But he was, I would still make the statement that he's one of the best human beings, that I've known of in our generation.
right,
And when him, not only did somebody get killed on the conservative side by somebody with ties, on the other side of the aisle, and not only that, but a ton of people celebrated it. They did this to, like, one of the best human beings, who was one of the most patient people with people who disagreed with him. Like, you
right,
look at the conversations that he had, and, like, again, wasn't perfect, but the respect that he showed to people, the patience he had with them, um you know was incredible. So I'll shut up. That's a lot of stuff I like to say.
right.
Charlie
But
Kirk had a
yeah,
huge impact on me. But
those
go ahead.
are those are very good points to make. That like you said, he may have lost his cool a few times, but overall, he was very patient, very civil in all the conversations he had. Turning Point and Charlie Kirk especially really valued the freedom of speech, and I think
Mm,
he really showed how much we value it, when he went out and let people from the other side come up to the table and speak, and he'd have civil conversations with them, calm, collected, and I think it's admirable. I think all of us should take from that example, and we see though that even when people do that, there are you know people don't like it. People don't like to be told they're wrong. They don't like to hear the truth. And so some people who are cowardly and won't go and, have the conversation decide that they're going to shoot the person who disagrees with them. And that's obviously wrong.
yeah. Yeah, no, although not everybody on the other side of the aisle agrees with us on that, I think some of the data is frightening, um but yeah, so, like, I want to hear, like, so that's what kind of got you to the place where you wanted to start, Turning Point. And what's really interesting, and what I like about this, and when months ago at the Cumberland County Republican Committee, and then also prior to that, I actually had Christina Parker, who I think was the co-founder of the first ever Turning Point chapter in the state of Maine, with
I
Anna
believe so. Yeah.
Gary. I asked her, like, how do you engage younger people? How do you get more young people involved in politics? And her response was, start when they're young. Essentially, my mom had me doing stuff, she said, when she was young. And what's interesting is, like,
Right.
that's same story with you, right? You started
Yeah.
getting involved in helping campaign with someone, and now, like, that's led to more passion for you. There's a young man that's connected to me through my church and stuff like that went out door to door with me when he was, like, I don't know, 13 or 14 back in 2022.
Mhm.
And now he is very, I mean, I think he paid attention, was interested in politics anyway, but he's, like, very interested, went to the Charlie Kirk event with me, and
Yep.
has actually discovered stuff and shared stuff with his father and with me that I've learned some really great resources because he got involved. So I think that's a really good. I'm glad that you shared that, because I think it's really powerful to point out that, hey, we need to stop waiting until kids turn 20 and then asking them to be engaged in
Right.
politics, and we should invite them along earlier in the process. So what you were at the event with Charlie Kirk.
Yeah.
You want to share a little bit about your experience being there? And yeah.
Yeah. So I knew about the event a good bit before because Heidi mentioned it to me that it was in the works, and so um, as the event came up, Heidi was like, "Hey, do you want to do the Pledge of Allegiance at the event?" And I was like, "Oh gosh, how many people are going to be there?" And she said like 300. And she's the only person that could have convinced me to do that. But I actually led the Pledge of Allegiance at the event, which was pretty cool. I was extremely
Yeah.
nervous beforehand, but looking back on it, it was awesome that I got to do that. And then, Charlie Kirk sat down with Steve Robinson and had that conversation, and he gave great speech on what we need to do in Maine. Um, and then after the event, we went outside and we talked to him for a little bit. He asked us a few questions about like the girls' sports issue, and then we got a group picture and a picture with him. I have a picture of me with him. It's really nice. So
Wow. Yeah.
that was great.
That's
That was a great opportunity.
yeah. It's I was talking to some people shortly after, I think the day after he passed, and I remember saying, like, obviously I feel very fortunate to have been able to attend one of the last. I mean, when you think about it, I mean,
Yeah.
he did some other stuff between then, but it was like less than 6 weeks prior to, or
Right.
almost 6 weeks, something like that. And having the opportunity to meet him, I didn't actually get to meet him, but just even being able to be there in
Right.
the audience and
Yeah.
hear him speak and talk specifically about Maine with was really incredible. But so I feel uncomfortable calling it an opportunity, but that is what it is. It was an opportunity. I
Yeah.
actually went out to. You didn't go out to the vigil, did you? By any chance? Not the vigil, but the
Oh,
go out to Arizona for the
no, I
memorial.
didn't make it
No.
out there,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Oh, right. Obviously, because you were doing your other event the day
Right. Well, we
before.
had our event the day before, but it would have been a lot to go out there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So yeah, no, that's anyway, it was just very, we felt, I feel very fortunate to have had the opportunity to kind of see him speak shortly before his death. We wish he was still here, but we're excited at the same time for the growth that's come. Like, we need to win our country back and our state back. And as I think you were at the event last night, I was commenting. I remember during 2020 or 2021 when I was very concerned for our country and our government. I still am, but I was a little worried that we might have already lost the coup,
right.
and and I was trying to figure out where hope comes from. And one of the things the conclusions that I came to, I read a book about the French underground, and I was surprised to learn that the leaders of the French underground were teenagers, because the adults were afraid to resist resist the Nazis
Yeah.
publicly, or even be known to do it privately and secretly, because of the impact. They don't want to hurt their children. And I think we're in a similar situation right here in our environment today. Like, parents are largely afraid to speak up for their kids because they're afraid of losing their job, and they're afraid of, like, the targeting that would happen to their kids. And so what's happening is, like, in a lot of cases, we're actually having younger people people being the ones who are more willing to speak up. So it's an interesting
Yeah.
place that we're in. So what can you tell me? Like, I don't even know what Club America does. So what does your chapter do? And then I also have some other follow up questions because you go to are everybody who's part of your chapter part of the same school that you're a part of, or
No, ours is
yeah,
for any homeschoolers, or I mean, really anyone in York County, or like even a few people like who would be closer to our events from Cumberland County. Really, anyone can come. Um, the officers, so me, my vice president, and secretary, we all go to the same school. But yeah, it's open to anyone really. We'd actually encourage people who go to a school, like, a public school, to actually start their own. But if someone's too busy, it's fine if they can come to ours. But we want people to start. We want it to grow more. We want more chapters to start.
yeah, absolutely. And so how many? So you said there's about 20 or so people that have been coming, or I know obviously there were 300 at the
Right, but
which was
not
they
all of
weren't
them
all
were
kids.
high schoolers, right? So yeah, I think we have around 20 right now, but usually we don't get all of them at once to every event, especially this time of year. A lot of like soccer people busy with that. So, but yeah, we have a good amount of people, and it's grown a good bit since then too. My word.
I think, are you going to make it? That's the question. But no,
Yeah, I'll be fine. I've just had this chronic cough for like the last 3 years, and it just never leaves me.
oh wow,
Well,
that's
I'm
crazy.
exaggerating, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I was gonna say I was gonna ask some questions about injections, but anyway, we'll leave that alone. So I guess the question is like, what do you guys do? I think that's something that I
mm,
don't necessarily know what the chapters do,
yep.
because my understanding is that Turning Point USA, they're not political organizations. They're 501c3 nonprofit,
Mm.
right? And so they themselves, you guys don't directly engage in activism. Is that right?
No, that's not necessarily true. We're nonpartisan, so we don't necessarily support a specific party, but we do promote people being civically engaged. So we want people to vote. Like at the event last night in Augusta, I brought some like voter registration cards, so anyone who wanted to register to vote could do that. And some groups, like, well, not really, they don't really protest, but they'll like table events with signs and stuff and talk to people. The college chapters might do more with like actually talking to people, but usually at the high school level, they really don't want any confrontational kind of thing. So they don't do the same amount of stuff like that. But we still are activists in a way. We're just not like out there protesting with signs.
Okay. And so what do you guys do? Like what's the focus when you guys get together? Like and how do you how do you build up your chapter? How do you like empower students? Like what's the
Yeah.
process look like? I'm
So
curious.
I like to think of it in three ways. First thing we do, and they all have to do with freedom, because that's our goal really as in Turning Point, is to promote freedom. So the first thing we do really is educate people about freedom. So we want to show them that they have freedoms, teach them about it, show the youth the attack that is on the freedoms. Um, and we may not specify which side it comes from. I personally will specify, yes, it comes from the left, but we can't. I mean, ideologically, I guess Turning Point could, but we just can't be partisan towards either party. But obviously, I'm more conservative, um, and so yeah, we want to educate people on freedom. We also want the youth to enjoy freedom, so we do fun stuff too. Like our first few events really was just to introduce what we were going to do. So we hung out, had pizza. Teenagers love pizza. Pizza's great. uh, we had like we played games like cornhole and like basketball. Just had fun too. And then the last thing we do is work to protect freedom, and that's just like and the other two things can apply into that as well. But we also, like I said about voter registration, we want people to be registered to vote so that they can vote for people who will work to protect our liberties. um, we do a lot of things to make sure we protect freedom as well.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think education is one of the biggest things that we don't you know, we don't as a society, right? We don't like and as school, I remember so you go to a Christian school. Do you like, is there civics that gets taught in your school? It largely wasn't taught. I mean, I could go into detail, but like, tell me about your experience. And obviously going to a Christian school, you don't want to, but, but like, is it something that's really emphasized?
So it's not like super emphasized, but it's in history too a lot. Like there's a lot of focus on it in history. Um, and also as a senior, we have a class specifically on government and economics this year. So we do have that. So we do have a government economics class at some point during your high school. Also, we did have a politics elective, and that's when Heidi and Nate taught us, or I guess I should say the Honorable Heidi Sampson and Representative Nate Wadsworth. So I
That's
don't
the
get
appropriate way to
yeah,
address them or
but
mention them. Yeah.
yeah, they taught us for a few years, and so that was a great experience, like I said. And then through the other project we do every year, we have the annual like it's called the academic fair. So you pick a topic and you do like different subjects on it. And so I did politics, and this last time we did it, I did economics. So I tend to pick a political subject.
Yeah. Nice. So there are opportunities in your school. Unfortunately, like I think in most, what's interesting is in the public school, I think it's primarily taught, like politics is taught through osmosis. I think it, rather than being directly taught, it's indirectly taught, right? And
Right,
it's all like primarily coming from the left.
right,
In my professional
right. Well, like in
opinion.
health class and saying that there's more than two genders or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, that's being more directly taught.
That
And
is being more
but
direct
although,
too. But well,
but
like when you have a book that has like, that kind of thing, like, two guys as a parent, it's not as direct, but and there's other ways, like you said, but
well, I think through their
like,
like their AC AAA policies, through a
right,
number of different ways,
right.
the schools are indirectly teaching more Democrat leaning politics,
Oh, for sure.
aggressively, I would say. But they don't really teach civics in a way that helps people understand the process, right?
Yeah.
So like, what's the most important form of government where you can have the most significant impact?
uh, well, a Republican form of government where you can, or a Democratic Republic where you can vote for your representative, because you don't want pure democracy where it's mob rule, but you also want to be still represented. So that's why we have a Democratic Republic and with a constitution to protect your rights.
Yeah, no, and that makes perfect sense. I love that answer, but driving at like
Oh,
most people, for instance, I'll kind of give you a hint as to what I was getting at. Most people are heavily focused on what's happening in Washington D.C. How
mhm.
much can you impact Washington
Oh,
D.C.?
I see what you're saying. Yeah, you need to focus more on the local level with a lot of
Yeah.
things because you're not gonna like if you call like a representative or a senator um, from DC, they're not all usually going to answer you, or maybe they'll have their secretary answer you. Whereas if you were to contact a state representative, or especially like a local school board member or a selectman, they're a lot more likely to answer you and listen to what you have to say because you're focusing on the local area. There's also a lot of you know interest that is specialized to certain local areas. Like, if you have a more agricultural town and then you have more of an industrial town and then you have, the same law that applies to both of them, but one might work better for the other, then, that's why it's better to focus on local politics. But also you'll make, like you said, you'll make a better impact on local politics than you will federal.
Right. I mean, both from your example, right? Like, say somebody's in the Senate. How many people are registered voters here in the state of Maine? You know what I mean? Like, we have a population of, I don't know, somewhere around 1.4 million. And so almost a million people. I don't. Susan Collins does not have enough, or Angus King. They don't have enough time, even if they wanted
Right.
to talk with everybody individually. It's not possible. But your
Right. And
local reps, as
especially
you
with
said, your city
people.
council members, your school board members, those people actually have time to actually have a conversation with you.
Right.
And you have like, it was funny. I remember going door to door and I met this guy who is a strong Trump supporter. This is in 2022. And he's like, I only vote in the presidential elections because that's where my vote counts the most. And I'm like, No, that's actually where your vote counts the least. Whereas all city council, school board,
Right.
mayor, state house, state senate, those you have much in reverse order, have a much more significant
Yeah.
impact on whether or not somebody gets elected. You can actually make a difference because some of those are come down to a couple of votes, and there's only, again, 500 people are going to vote on this thing
Right.
versus 150 million are going to vote on this thing, right? Where do you have the higher impact? It's the smaller amount.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and part of the reason I was kind of hitting at that is because, like, even when they are teaching about politics in the schools, they're really focused on the national, if they're
Yeah.
focused on anything at all. Or at least they have been historically. I'm not in the public schools right now, but that's what I
Right. Well,
recall,
just
right?
based on how much people know about local politics should show you that they really only focus on the federal. I mean, all they ever talk about is, Trump did this, Trump did that. They never really talk about what happens in more local legislatures. So
Yeah. So let's quiz you real quick. How many legislators are in the state of Maine?
you mean like in the state house
Yeah.
or the Senate
How?
too? So
Yeah.
there's 100 in the state house and 35 in the Senate, right?
There are 100 and shoot 151
Is it 150?
in the house, in the state house, and the 35 in the Senate.
Okay, I got
So
the Senate
100,
right.
186 total. No, it's
Oh, okay,
well,
yes, I see
yeah.
what it yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Hmm,
186 total. And so, like, that's no like, but this isn't a great example. I was not aware. Um, I voted, and so I'd voted for these things, but I didn't really understand how it worked. Most
mhm,
people, I think, don't know. I talk about this frequently on this podcast and say I didn't even know, but most people don't realize that the state government is a mirror image of the federal government, right?
right,
Where you've got the House, the Senate, the judiciary. Every state
right,
has a Supreme Court. They might not call it that, but I think they
yeah,
mostly do. And then there's in place of the president, is the executive branch. So we have a governor, which is and so it's a mirror image of the federal government. They each have different levels of jurisdiction. Um, and yeah, I was not aware of that. I didn't know that we had a House and a Senate. I mean, again, I'd voted for these things, and I still wasn't like actively aware of that reality.
right,
So you did pretty good. You knew how many people were in the Senate. And but yeah, so like a lot of people just don't know that, and so like there's no shame in that, I think. But that's part of the problem. That's where we need to. That's part of the reason this podcast exists, to better educate people on what's going on here in the state of Maine, because the mainstream media is not doing their job. Neither is the education system, and I think the intention is to keep people in the dark and just give people speaking points so that they know that they're supposed to hate orange man bad, and that they're supposed to take the flu shot because otherwise they're going to kill other people, nonsense like that, rather than people being educated. And so one of the things that you guys do is you help educate people, you help them understand, and which I think is really, really awesome. So one of the things I'm curious about for you is, like, okay, so you kind of explained a little bit about why you got involved, but like, what are the issues? Because for most people, if you're engaged in politics, like, usually there are issues that have kind of pulled you in to put you in a place where you're like, these are the issues that matter the most to me. We can say we care about all the issues, but there are like core issues that matter most to you. And so why are you a conservative? What are the issues that drive you to want to be involved in Maine politics, and risk, I don't know, your future your ability to get jobs and all, like, and who will be friends with you and all that other kind of stuff. Yeah. What are the issues that drive you?
yeah, I don't care what other people think of my political views. My top so I'm a Christian, so and I'm not saying that, every Christian. I'm not gonna make a blanket statement, but I'm saying as a Christian, my top issues are probably like abortion or, probably attack on girl sports is, a big one too. And a lot of people in Maine don't wanna focus, like a lot of Republicans in Maine don't wanna focus on the abortion issue because it's not as popular. Like the girl sports issue is like an 80-20 issue here. Abortion is definitely not that. But I still think that we shouldn't be giving up on the fight against killing babies in the womb. Like,
Hmm.
So that's one of the top issues for me. I'm still obviously very conservative on economics, other issues like gun rights, illegal immigration. So I'm conservative overall. And so when I first started getting into politics, my project was kind of broad. So I covered like ideologies and like what they thought on each policy. So as I did that, I kind of learned a lot about all the different policies. So I kind
That
of
that
gained conservative standing in a lot of those too. Doesn't mean
that's
I know
awesome.
everything about all of those issues, but and clearly I didn't even know the 50 additional legislators in the state house. But
Yeah. Well, it's again, I don't know how many people know that off the top of their head.
I
This is one of
definitely
the
should have
problems we
known
have.
that off the top of my head. So
That's okay. Always a learning opportunity. Like, in life, we primarily get, practice quizzes, and then
right.
and occasionally there's a real test, and this is not a real test. Um, so obviously, like you mentioned abortion. Like, what do you think about? You're not in favor of abortion. At what level? To what degree?
I think the that there's life starts at conception. So when the baby is conceived, when it's a fetus, then I do not think that you should abort that just because. And I obviously understand there are grave instances where, maybe like I don't know what I can't say on a podcast, but maybe you
You
were
can you can say anything you want.
okay. Like let's say instances of rape, and that's the one that Democrats like to bring up a lot because it's more of an emotionally attached position on abortion. But the thing is, you can't just decide, well, in this case, it is a baby, but in the other case, it's not like it's not alive. That's not how it works. I mean, it all also comes down to whether there's subjective truth, like if your truth is not my truth. That's just completely bogus. I mean, obviously there is truth in the world. You don't even really need to make an argument about it because when you have a debate with someone that thinks that there is no objective truth, you're not going to get anywhere because they're not going to
Yeah.
believe you no matter what. They're going to say, "Well, that's not true," because I don't believe that. And that's partially what happens when you make that argument in abortion because you say, "Well, in this case, it's fine, but when this happens to the woman, that's when it's okay to do it." And you can't just exchange a life for a life.
Hmm. Yeah, so you would say it's complicated, but in a situation where a child has been somebody has been raped, you're saying that you don't think that that's grounds for having an abortion.
No,
What are situations? Are there any situations where, or are you a purist?
I'm very pro-life.
Okay.
I think
No,
that life starts at conception. That's a scientific fact. You can't change that just because either an inconvenience or like I understand that these circumstances are very grave, and obviously, you know, it's a big issue with what's going on with things like rape right now in our country. It happens. So, but that doesn't mean you just get to abort the baby.
yeah. Well, I think it's interesting. A lot of people like, so you brought this up because these are the like kind of beginning of the conversation to trying to throw
Mm,
stuff in your face if you say that you're pro-life, but they'll say, what about rape, incest, and when the mother's
right.
life is at risk? um and I think like they're not being honest, generally speaking, when they're having that conversation, because they're actually fighting for abortion at any time for any reason,
Right.
95% of the time, the people that are having these arguments, but they're trying to hide behind these things, and that's where I've been like, all right, let's give you those. We'll only allow abortions in cases where rape, incest, or the mother's life's at risk.
Mhm.
I'm willing from
Okay, I
as
see
it
what you're
relates
saying from a
as
political
it as
standpoint.
it relates to myself in politics. I am pro-life, but I would say, like, in order to be able to like save all the other lives, I would be willing to make that concession personally. I'm not
I get
again
what you
there
I get what you're
or
saying, but I also think
you
that
don't have to agree
these
with me, by the way. That's kind of
right,
that's more
right,
where I've like as I've entered into the political realm, if I could make this success, and in my time in politics, we could get to a place where where abortions
right.
were limited there, we would eliminate like 99% of abortions.
No, I do agree
And I
that
would feel like that was a huge victory, and I would feel good.
I
even
do
if it's not
agree
perfect.
that
Yeah.
sometimes you have to go gradually with things, and I think that, you know, that's fine, but I think you should have the end goal of eliminating all abortion. So, if you can start
Yeah.
with that, that's fine, but if you're just gonna stop there, I don't think you should just stop there.
Yeah. So, what do you think about politicians in Maine that are choosing not to talk about this, or to hold other stances, in order to be able to get elected?
I mean, I understand that there's a aspect of political tact that you have to have, and a sacrifice you have to make to, get elected, but I also think that you shouldn't be making concessions on issues like this because, this is a baby's actual life that's at stake. And when you don't, talk about that, I mean, as long as you're not saying, doesn't mean you have to go out there and be at every pro life rally. I'm not saying that. But if you're not talking about it at all, I think is a bit cowardly.
I love it. That's what I was hoping you were going to call politicians cowards. So if you're not willing to have this conversation and speak, especially if you believe it to be true, because I think that's one of the things that there's a lot of politicians that
Right.
believe one thing, but will get out there and will not be willing to
Right.
speak about it, for fear that it might hurt them politically, and they won't speak. They won't admit where they stand. And I agree. I mean, I have probably a little bit more, I don't know, compassion might not be the word. I don't know, understand. I don't
Lenient.
know. Like I get it, right? Like we're at a place. So there basically, when I look at the political realm, right, there are a number of different levels where people come in. There are allies that we have here, and there are allies that we have here, and everybody plays a part. And maybe in the short term, in order to be able to win the governorship, right, in 2026, we need a candidate that's theoretically, we'll say that this is the argument anyway, that we need a Susan Collins like candidate to be able to
Right.
win governor, somebody who's pro-choice but is conservative in a lot of other ways, but is a little bit more of a bridge builder between Republicans and Democrats and whatever. Which I don't know. Right now, I don't know that bridge exists, between Republicans and Democrats. I don't know about you. Um,
I think I think that we definitely need to try to make a bridge because, even though we may disagree with them on some very fundamental issues involving our worldviews, you know, we can't just live at odds with people we disagree with. And, when we use rhetoric against people who we disagree with, like you think of the media, how often they've called, Trump a fascist, how often they've called Charlie Kirk a fascist. And then you think of what fascists actually did. And then, you have someone who's mentally unstable and sees what fascists actually did and hears, oh, this person's a fascist. You could see why they might have, obviously we don't agree with it, but you can see why they might have made that connection. Oh, it's okay to kill this person.
Yeah. No, 100%. So like what's interesting is culturally, right? Like there's been a debate going on essentially. Like, and this is different than that debate, but like there's the one of the things that says if you had the opportunity to go back in time and kill Hitler when he was a baby, right? Would you do that? Right. This is a question that people I would say no, you don't do that. He's not done anything wrong. We can't do anything to somebody, but this is a question that gets asked, and the fact that the question that gets asked, it's a foregone conclusion that if Hitler is as an adult, you have the opportunity to silence him, that you would absolutely do that. In fact,
Right.
within the
But you
Christian
wouldn't
faith,
know if you were there.
what?
You wouldn't know if you were there when Hitler was a baby. You wouldn't know
Well,
it.
well,
And
well
even if you knew of the potential, that doesn't make it right for you to kill someone.
Agreed. I know. I'm in agreement there. But like
Right.
the
Yeah.
point, part of the point that I'm kind of trying to get at here
Mhm.
is as an adult, as Hitler as an adult, I think everybody, most people, I should say, would say that it would have been justified to have eliminated him, right? To the point where one of the more recent martyrs of the faith, not Charlie Kirk, but prior to that, was a guy named Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was a pastor. It's a really great story, really great biography written by Eric Metaxas. If you haven't read it, highly recommend. But in it, it lists. Oh, they awesome. Yeah,
I
perfect.
haven't. I have only read a few pages. I haven't actually gotten through it yet.
I'll be honest, I'm not terribly far into it, but it's very well written so far, and I've heard a lot of great things about it. And so in it though, like it talks about how Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a martyr. I already
Mm,
knew about Dietrich Bonhoeffer before getting that, but he's a guy who wrote a book called The Cost of Discipleship, and he
mm,
basically said that it's a free gift essentially that costs everything. That yes, salvation is free, but the reality is there's still a cost of following Jesus. There is
right.
it doesn't mean that it's works-based salvation, but it does mean that if God has transformed your heart, there are things that you need to do.
Yeah.
That's kind of basically an extrapolation of the book of James.
Yeah. And
Um,
it's worth the
and
cost.
yeah, and he wrote that book, and then he had an opportunity. He was out of Germany in the leading up to, he was actually in the United States of America at one point, I believe the story goes. And like he said, how can I preach to them after if I don't go through it with them? And so he went back to Germany when he could have not, and basically was part of the resistance, attempted to part of a plot to assassinate Hitler, and then he died in prison weeks prior to liberation, sadly. And we see him as a martyr. And so like I say all that to say, like, this idea of like, if Hitler existed, then like I think a lot of people would say that it would be appropriate. And so that's where the rhetoric, what's interesting to me is, it's to sit here and look at this and just feel in a sense helpless, not helpless, but helpless against a lot of what people buy into it. A lot of this nonsense is to look at it and say, I want to be able to do something. I can sit here and see what's happening, but I can't convince other people that that's what's happening, right? Because the mainstream media has such a grip on a significant portion of our population. Even though their ratings are going down, they're still, I mean, one of the things I like to cite is that, Trump won, right? He won the popular vote, but he didn't get 50%. Like, as scary and as dangerous as the policies that Kamala Harris brought,
Hmm.
transgender treatment of minors, abortion all the way up until birth, the border policies,
Hmm.
warmonger, the pharmaceutical nonsense, like all the, so there's the economy. There's so many, freedom of speech. Right? There's so many issues with her. Trump still, like, even though he won the popular vote, he didn't get 50% of the vote. There are arguments that they're cheating in California, yeah, so and potentially other places. So he probably of real, actual, legal votes, probably he got more than 50%. But the reality is, like, tens of millions of people voted for Kamala Harris. And so we're in this situation where so many people are still believing the nonsense of this. And that organization, while calling and saying that Trump's rhetoric is dangerous for our democracy, are also calling him, quote unquote, literal Hitler.
Hmm. Right.
Right. And so, like, he's the one that they blame for rhetoric. And yet their rhetoric, given the general nature of the fact that most people believe that it would have been appropriate to assassinate Hitler, and then they go out and call Trump Hitler.
Yeah.
So you can understand that if you buy into that and if you believe the nonsense, how somebody could come to a place where they would do what they would do and they would feel like they were a hero.
Yeah. And I do
It's
think that Trump could tone down his rhetoric a little bit because he does say, I mean, it's kind of expected with him at this point. Half the things he says, he doesn't completely mean. He's just saying it. And so I do think he could, be a bit more careful of what he says. But I obviously think that, you know, even though he says some things like that, the cost of, him saying a few things that people don't like, half of it is just the truth. They just don't like
yep,
that.
yep,
And yeah, the cost of that compared to the benefit of much better policies is, quite really worth the cost. And it's not
yeah.
like the left doesn't also use bad rhetoric, like you were just saying.
Theirs is worse.
Oh, there's a yeah.
Right? You know what I mean? Like
That's
calling
true.
somebody Hitler who is not Hitler, like calling somebody racist, calling Charlie Kirk a bigot, and like
Right.
these types of things that they do pretty regularly. Celebrating the assassination of Charlie Kirk, for instance, like there were literally people at a number of different levels throughout our society that did that, and like with Trump, I would say it's like 99% the media, 1% Trump. So let's just stop
Mm,
talking about Trump. I'm done. Like I've been somebody who has said, yeah, he's his rhetoric, but I'm just done with that because I'm just so tired of like, yeah, okay, maybe he says a few things and the way he says some things, sure. But if you compare that to what's happening on the other side, like
mm,
it's not even worth being compared. Like they are advancing the hateful rhetoric, and he's like leaning into it, not hateful, but leaning into saying things that they don't like
like
to
get
hear.
people's attention too.
Well, and it's really tactical for him. It's to
Right.
distract them so that he can do something over here where they're just tweeting about how angry that they are that he put a Mexican hat on on Hakeem Jeffries, and they're like, oh my gosh, how could he possibly do that? That's so racist. I'm like, I don't. Okay, but that's the stuff that they want him to tone down. Which what's fascinating? Have you studied a lot of like British Parliament and how they operate and used to operate in particular?
Not a whole lot.
Well, they literally watch the movie Amazing Grace if you haven't. Great movie.
I think I have seen that. I don't remember a lot about it. Is that the one with William Wilberforce?
That is, and if you
Okay.
watch it, they literally make fun of each other.
Yeah.
Right? Like, they were debating about the war in America at the time, under
Mhm.
King George, and the one guy says, "Half of the American. Why would we withdraw when half of the Americans, side with us?" And Wilberforce gets up, and he says, less than 1 in 4 Americans are loyal to the crown. If that's what is it? He says, if he calls that half, I'd hate to be his wife and share half his bed. And like that's the type of. I mean, they ragged on each other all the time. And Trump says something about somebody, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, people are just so soft," and I'm just tired of it. Anyway, that's a whole nother story. Um, but
Well,
uh,
and
but how?
oftentimes they'll
Go ahead.
misquote what they say. Like what was it he said? It was like when right before the election, what he said about Liz Cheney. Like, he said, if she were actually in the place in a war zone where guns were pointed at her, that she would actually, she would know better than to say what she says. And then they're all like, "Oh, he just said that we should point guns at Liz Cheney." He did not say that. And this was
Right.
like mainstream media saying this.
Oh
And
yeah.
then there was the whole thing with what Laurel Libby said about the neo Nazis and how they have
Yep.
freedom of speech, something along those lines. And they said, "Oh, she said that she supports Nazis." It's just bogus, and everyone can see it at this point.
Yeah. Well, and they've been doing it here in Maine even before Trump, right? So if you go back to the Paul LePage days, like Paul LePage liked to say that he was Trump before Trump.
Yeah,
That was one of his fun things that he said. But he in a lot of ways he was, in the sense that they twisted things. They took like things that he said out of context, and they've been the media on the left, and that's the thing that's sad at this point, was we're not in it, and that's the difficulty about building a bridge. We talk to kind of come back to that, is like, I have friends who are liberals, and I try to have I try to have conversations with them, and I'm just like, I don't know how we get there. I want to get there, but it's like with this continuing resolution bill that they have in Washington right now. Like in order to like find middle ground with Democrats, right? We have to agree to things that are diametrically opposed to our worldview.
right.
We have to kill some babies. We have to mutilate some children. We have to provide health care for illegal immigrants. Whatever it is, like that's their minimum, right? So like, who's not coming to the table? Like, how can we find middle ground in our world? How can we get there? I think that is the challenge. Now, it starts with having conversation, but I think when it comes to policy, I think one of the things, I don't know if you've thought about this a lot, but like one of the things that I've seen is that we're really challenged in the sense that if you turn back the clock like 15 years, and I would actually say I had conversations about this with a friend of mine 6 years ago, right? And I, she's liberal. Obviously, I'm not. I think she would have described herself as being somewhere between a communist and a libertarian. It's very confusing because those are
It sounds
diametrically
confusing.
opposed, uh, right? Like she, so
Like those do not
um,
go hand in hand whatsoever.
it's like saying I believe in gun control, but I also want to have a gun. It's like, okay,
Right. The
all
only
right,
way that both of those could go together is that libertarians are often secular. So I guess that's really the only way I can think of. Like on social issue. I mean, but even then communists weren't, you know.
yeah,
It
it
just
doesn't
doesn't
make any.
work.
It doesn't make any sense. But anyway, but like we would talk sometimes, and I would say like, we don't agree about the means, but we agree about the end. We want to get to the same place. We want to get to a place where there's human flourishing, like
Mm,
a maximum human flourishing. But like, which was fine before, but now how is that defined? Right. So maximum human flourishing would be as many children as possible that want to transition. We're going to transition them. You know, abortions out the so it's like we have a diametrically opposed, as many people as possible entering into the country. We'll eliminate the illegality of immigration and bring everybody here, and we'll use taxpayer dollars to fund getting people here and taking care of people, universal basic income, all these. It's like we're talking about two different universes. So
yeah. Well,
how
I
do
was
we
gonna
build a bridge between those?
okay, yeah. So I think a lot of it I keep trying, sorry.
Oh, you're
um
good.
A lot of it comes down to worldview, I think. So, and not every conservative is a Christian, but there's obviously a recognition that traditional values work better. The West was built on Christian values, or at least on the Bible. Some would say that, it might be the Jewish, but, they're built on Christian values. Um, so, what was I saying? I forgot what I was saying. Sorry.
It's about building.
Uh,
I think we're talking about
I
building a
think,
bridge.
yeah, I know. I
Yeah.
was just had a brain fart real quick.
Yep.
So yeah, the worldviews are just completely different. And I think that comes down to a lot of it. I think overall, like, I'm a Christian, so I think that our goal should be to share the gospel in all that we do. And I think that's really what's going to affect change. I don't think that all these people's minds are really going to ever be changed on some of these things. I think a lot of what it is, a difference between trying to solve the problem and actually stop it from occurring, or just giving a quick solution that will fix it. It doesn't even usually fix it without thinking of the other consequences that may come from that. And I think we can do all these things to try to make sure we don't have progressive policies, and eventually sometimes they'll work, but no matter what, there's always going to be sin in our world. And so, what we need to do is share the gospel above all things. And that's what's going to actually affect change in our country. And we can start with that locally. You know, all you have to do is just tell someone, Jesus loves you. And, that's not all it is. It's not all you have to do. But it's a simple thing you can do. Ask someone, how can I pray for you? Just be a light for Christ and what you do. And that's really what's going to affect change in our country.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think I've been talking a lot more recently about how I believe that, though I'm engaged in politics and though I'm trying to use the political process, I've definitely come to the conclusion that even if we get the right policies in place, that doesn't fix our culture.
Right.
Actually,
They're just
what we
gonna find
need.
sorry, they're just gonna find another policy that, tries to solve the problem but doesn't actually go to the root of it.
Yeah. Well, it just, these problems are bigger than humans without Jesus, without
Right.
God, without like, you know, there's so many people though that just seem to think and believe that they don't need God, and are so resistant to that until they get broken. And some, even when they're broken, they still refuse.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think I would agree that in order to fix our culture, we need to have a spiritual awakening and revival.
For
And then, but I also think what's interesting is, so Charlie Kirk, I've shared this before, and so apologize to everybody who's hearing it for the fifth time. But like shortly before he passed, he was speaking, and he talked about the fact that some people have this idea that we should just share the gospel. We shouldn't focus on politics. We should just get out there and try to help people come to know Jesus. And but
Yeah.
his comment was essentially like, what if I told you that if you speak sense, make sense, and talk about things that are going on in the public square, and you say things that make sense, that and people start taste, as I think as he put it, people taste of the um, uh, taste of the streams, the water of liberty, I guess, the streams of liberty. They're going to want to know where its source is, right? And so, like when you are engaging in politics, when you're engaging in your job, wherever it might be, like, and you're doing so from a Christian worldview, eventually people are going to want to know, like, what made that, why are you doing that, because it's different than a lot of other people, it's different than the culture around us, right? And they're going to want to know, where does that come from?
Yeah.
And I think that I've seen that play out in my life, with people who, as a result of like the way that I live and the things that I'm doing, they've been like, oh, that's interesting, and it's led them to a place of faith. And led others to consider, and who didn't move forward. But like the point is, I think that's a big part. So engaging in politics can actually help grow the
No, yeah,
church.
I
I think is
definitely agree.
actually
We should be involved in politics. And I think that goes back to what I said, and you mentioned, work too. Everything you do, you should be a light for Christ. And it doesn't mean that you just, that you should go to church for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because that's not, you're not going to be able to do, you still have to do other things. And being involved in politics there's nothing wrong with that. That you actually should be doing that. You should be, if you're a Christian, you should be, speaking out against what's going on in our country. You should be voting for, who you think's going to do a better job of bringing Christian values back to our country, and also having common sense. And all we do, we should be a light for Christ. And so I think that's, when we think of it in the lens of that we should be a light for Christ in all that we do, that allows us to do a lot of things that we still should be doing, but we still do it for Christ. We still focus on God through what we do.
Yeah. No, 100%. So we shouldn't. Are you saying that we shouldn't hide our light under a bushel?
Yes, I'm saying that we should definitely. I'm saying definitely. I mean, I wear this hat everywhere I go. It says "Stand for the flag, kneel for the cross." So unless I'm in a place where it's inform or it's too formal for a hat. But even then, I wear this shirt here. I have the Turning Point sticker on my car. I have a Proud Conservative sticker on the back. I'm not ashamed to show my political views, and I'm also not ashamed to say that I'm a Christian. And I want as many people to know that, and I want to make sure that I'm a light for them as well, so that they see that it's not me. Anything I do is not me. It's all God. I mean, anything bad I do is probably my fault, but anything that I do that's good is God.
Yeah, no, that's a good perspective. So here's a question for you, because there's a lot of Christians that don't want to engage in politics. They think that politics are just grimy and ucky and gross. And Trump's mean, so you can't be a Republican because of Trump. Well, that's a whole separate issue. But like, what do you say to people who are like not wanting to engage in politics because it's dirty and it's dark? It's one of the darkest places actually in our society, right? What do you say to Christians who don't want to engage there?
Well, if it's one of the darkest places in our society, we should be the light to it, to shine the light of Jesus through it. That's what I say. And it's weird for me to say that's what I say. but
You just said it. Yeah, no, it's great.
yeah, I think that in all that we do, there are obviously going to be sinful aspects in every part of life. Like, politics is not the only place that there is sin going on. You go anywhere, you're going to see sin. So just because sin is involved, just because there is darkness in a certain aspect of our lives, doesn't mean that we should not be involved in it. If anything, it means that we should be involved in it more. And I keep saying this, and I sound super repetitive, that we should be a light for Christ. And, just think of it like, there's the dark clouds, and that's, all the sin, all that's wrong with our world, but will be the sun that shines through. I like using analogies, but usually they don't work well. But that one actually wasn't too terrible.
No, it was good. No, I think that's exactly right. We need, and that's something that I've come to as well. And like, I was initially for many years, I was the Christian who was like, I'm going to go and vote. And in
Mm,
private, I'm going to have conversations with people when I know it's safe. I don't know that I necessarily thought of it that way, but like, that's the truth. I would,
mm,
where, when it's safe, I'm going to have conversations with people um, about politics, but I'm not going to like, generally speaking, speak publicly about
mm.
politics. And I largely held to that, right? Most of my adult life, and then God, against my will, pulled me into politics about 3 years ago, little almost 4 years ago, really. And I kind of got to this place where it really wasn't until last year where I was like, partly because there's this, and please don't do this, anybody out there, there are a lot of people who I think appear inauthentic when they cite their Christianity, as
Mhm.
though it's like I'm like it's a sales tactic,
Right.
right? You know what I mean? To get people to like them or trust them,
Mhm.
and that I'm not comfortable with. And I think there are a lot of people that there are people who fall into this category. And so, but partly because of that, I was like, I'm just going to leave, the faith. I'm going to like not emphasize the faith or the importance of
Mhm.
faith or whatever in my politics, right? And I began convicted where one of the guys who came to know Jesus, partly as a result of my engagement in politics and conversations with him, as he was not yet a Christian, he's sitting there saying, I think we can't fix society's problems without faith in God. And I'm like,
Yep.
that okay, well, I mean, if this guy who doesn't yet know Jesus can say this and he's not actively practicing any religion, I think I should be able to say that. And I think it's also true, right? And it kind of convicted me a bit. And so like I've begun shifting more and more to, like, as you kind of said, I led you there, but you said, like, if this is the darkest place in our society, then Christians absolutely need to be there to shine a light on it, right? Like that's the reality. And again, through doing that, through shining a light on it, we can save people both in the here and now, right? And the future. Like, if we can actually make a difference by helping people to see what's really going on and help fix our world, but
Mhm.
also by so doing, as a byproduct, we will also, that'll cause people to do what Charlie Kirk was talking about. They're going to taste of the streams of liberty, and they're going to want to know its source. And so, like, I think it's so important, and I'm so thankful to see that young people like you engaging. What can we do? One, I think, do you have any advice on what people can do to get more young people engaged and involved in politics? And or how to talk to young people, if that makes any sense, who
Mhm.
maybe aren't, because there's a combination of things, right? We have to convince other people who don't already believe the way that we believe politically, but we also have to make sure that those that do grow up in conservative homes don't lose their conservatism as they
Right.
grow up. So what are some things that we can do to reach and engage the youth?
Um, I think part of it is, exposing a lot of what's actually going on. I think that there's a lot of indoctrination in schools, and a lot of people on the left are like, "Oh, they're just blaming everything on indoctrination. They're saying that it's fake news." But is a lot of stuff going on that schools almost always tend to lean towards, especially the curriculums, towards the liberal ideology. And that in those years when you're in school, when you're gaining that education, that really forms your worldview and what you do for the rest of your life, how you think through things. That's part of what happens at school. A lot of people, a lot of my classmates have always complained. I've probably complained too about, things like certain aspects of grammar, like diagramming sentences. Like, why do you have to do that? It's not necessarily about, and my dad is going to laugh at me for mentioning this, but diagramming sentences, you do that to learn how things work and learn um, how things work better, learn organizational skills. You learn things from just learning. You learn the ability to learn on your own from education when you
Mm,
learn things specifically. And I keep using the word learn things, but I think
yeah,
you get what I'm saying. And then you
yeah.
said, let's see, so the question was, how can we get more young people involved too?
Yeah.
showing them that they don't have to fit in with the status quo. Because especially in like in Maine, the status quo is the liberal progressive side. Show them that they don't have to do that. It's not cool to be on the liberal side. I mean, I don't think we have to use, what's cool for anything. I don't really think what's cool matters. I think it's what right that actually matters. But, it's not cool necessarily. You don't have to fit into the status quo. If anything, um, it's better to stand up for what's right. And I think a lot of it, as I've mentioned before, goes to salvation. I think once kids have salvation, they're more willing. They see, it's worth the cost. You're going to have fruit as a Christian. You're not, otherwise you question whether or not you're really a Christian. If you're not like, I'm not saying those who, don't go out and talk to people about politics aren't Christian, but I'm saying that there should be, evidence that you are a Christian in your life. And I think part of that evidence can be to stand up for what's going on in other areas too. And then you said, what was the other question? How you can talk to, what was the other last part of
Well,
the?
I think we'll move on from that partly because I know that you need to go,
Oh yeah.
and I think we're beyond that point, and I think it's a more challenging question that requires more thought. But I think just kind of how do people get in touch with you if they want to, and if there are younger people who are in York County who want to get involved? I think
Mhm.
getting in touch with you is probably how they do that. But how do people get in touch with you?
So we have an email, and that's tpusa York County at gmail.com. Um, they can reach me through that. They could also reach out to our field representative, Grace Mack. So for any questions about Turning Point, but yeah, any questions about generally getting involved, you can email that. Email tpusa York County at gmail, and that's a good way to reach me.
And they can also find you on Instagram at
Right. Yeah.
TPA.
We have a Turning Point Instagram and Facebook account, and I personally have a Facebook account if they want to message me on Facebook.
Okay, awesome. And then just the really briefly, is it's really challenging and almost impossible to start a Turning Point chapter. Is that right?
Definitely not. You can definitely start a turn. It does not take nearly as much time as a lot of people think. We keep telling people, "Hey, you should start a chapter," and like, "Oh, but I don't have enough time." You can make time for this. Almost definitely. I mean, obviously there are some circumstances where you probably don't have enough time, but most people can make time to do it. Um, and I really encourage you to start a chapter. If you are in it, if you're like homeschooled in York County, there's also one in Cumberland County, you can go to those chapters. But if you go to a public school or even a private school that doesn't have a Turning Point chapter, start one. We'd love for you to start one. We will help you get set up. Our field rep will be in touch, and that would be great in helping spread the news, that we have freedom, promoting freedom, and also through Turning Point. I mean, it's a faith-based group, so we also want to spread the gospel through what we do too.
Yeah. So you heard it from Colby. It's not that hard. You can do it. Stand up, be counted, and join the fight. Not physical fight, but this, we'll call it like the in this ideological war and spiritual war that we're in here in America. So thank you so much for joining, Colby, and thank you
Yep.
for what you're doing. Thank you for being willing to speak out and help speak truth to this
Mhm.
this culture that doesn't want to hear the truth, and being willing not to back down on social issues that are unpopular, even though bringing abortion back to the standard before Miller went into office is like a 70-30 issue that we're on the right side of, for the record. But the full on version is not as popular. But it's not about doing what's popular; it's about doing what's right, and I appreciate that. So thanks so
Exactly.
much for coming on, and we
Thanks
will.
for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome, and hopefully we'll see you again in the near future. I think I'll see you next week. I think you're coming to
Yeah, I
our
hope
event.
you. It depends
Yeah.
on soccer playoffs, but I mean, if we lose on this week, then I will be there, but I don't
Well,
want to lose at the same time.
yeah. I hope that
But
you
it could be
win.
Monday, so yeah, hopefully, fingers crossed.
All right, sounds good. Well, thanks again, and we'll see you soon.
Yep. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. We'll be back here tomorrow with a really interesting story out of Saco, a mom who has her daughter being transitioned without her permission. So we will talk a lot about that. It'd be an interesting story.